Hi, I'd like to pick up our story of Iran now and talk about the absolute monarchy of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi and his regime from 1954, when he takes over thanks to an organized coup against the Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, until 1979, which is when his regime collapsed. There is a theme here. The main theme really is that the United States, as part of the Cold War, was much more comfortable working with the hands of an authoritarian/absolutist state, as long as it was anti-communist, than they were in advancing the cause of democracy. A problem which the United States would come to rue its results. The Shah takes over in 1954. He receives an extensive amount of American support from the outset, and he continues the work of his father to try and modernize Iran and especially to secularize Iran. And as part of this, he becomes convinced by President Kennedy to launch in 1963 what was called the White Revolution, to a great deal of fanfare, worldwide publicity, to try and gain more support for his regime and to try and gain more support from the United States. What was the White Revolution? The Shah wanted to show that he could reform from within without having a democracy. While he did maintain the form of the 1906 Constitution, there were elections, but they were rigged, corrupt from the start. He had political opposition, but it was handpicked, very much like the situation has been in Iran since 1979 under the Ayatollahs. They've exchanged essentially one authoritarian system for another. Under his White Revolution, it was primarily geared towards land reform. To a great deal of hoo-ha and publicity, the regime launched land reform, ostensibly to break up the estates of the landed elite and to make that large portion of that land available for purchase by those who are less fortunate, peasants and villages. Also to improve the terms of land tenancy for tenant farmers. Well, it probably did benefit some, but to a large degree, in reality, it worked out to the benefit of those who already were well off, including especially the Shah. The Shah was the largest landholder in the country. As part of this, he tried to dispossess a good part of the Shia clergy. Now you have to remember that Iran had had a state religion, the Shia faith of Islam, for centuries. But his was a secularizing regime, and he especially wanted to reduce the power of the Shia ulema, the educated elite, which he did during this time period, which was to gain him considerable growing opposition in the years ahead. Well, the White Revolution benefited, as I said, some, but mostly it didn't. What did happen was that Iran went through tremendous economic growth. Within a 10-year period, their economic growth averaged 10% a year growth, which is spectacular. Per capita income almost doubled from $300 to $500, making Iran look like a showcase for economic development. But it was to a large extent a facade. Yes, there was this kind of economic growth, but the wealth was not well distributed. Not only that, but infant mortality rates, life expectancy, even literacy rates really did not significantly improve. So it looked good, but in reality it wasn't. As President Nixon comes into power, relations with Iran become even closer. The British withdraw entirely from the Saudi Arabian Peninsula and the Persian Gulf by 1971, leaving a vacuum. So Nixon was looking for a regional policeman to control the flow of oil through the Persian Gulf. And he settled on having the Shah play that role. So huge amounts of military hardware went into the Shah's arsenal. He used this to seize 3 islands from the United Arab Emirates in 1971, gaining the enmity, of course, right away of a good part of the Arab world, which he had anyway because he had very close relations with Israel. He regarded the Arab-Israeli conflict as none of his concern. In fact, he rather admired the Israelis, and he worked out close relations with them, giving them oil at reasonable prices. You have to realize Israel had, and still has, virtually no oil. This gained even more opposition to Iran from within the Arab world. And under the terms of this regional policeman, otherwise known as the Nixon Doctrine, Shah's regime looked very, very powerful indeed, though it was to turn out to be something of a facade, because it was maintained by a secret police, Savak, which spied on any potential opposition, and which also would imprison and torture people by the thousands, not unlike what the current regime does to its opposition. In the midst of this, it made it look like he was an American dependency. After all, the United States had put him in power, was channeling large amounts of aid to him. The economic aid came to a halt by 1967, though, because the economic growth was so good. But the military aid continued, and there was a significant military contingent there from the United States, advisors, so-called. Well, the Nixon and Kissinger insisted, in exchange for all this help, that American advisors be exempt from prosecution in Iranian courts. Wow, that really makes to the Iranian people the United States look like it was running Iran, rather than Iranian people running their own, the Iranian government running itself. So it's not surprising that increasing opposition grew. He had alienated the Shia ulama. He alienated the democratic opposition by having a secret police in Savak, by running corrupt elections, rigged elections. He got approval for the White Revolution in a referendum where he got 99% of the vote, obvious fraud, and more. And in the midst of all this, he exiled Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who was rising in an strident opposition to the regime. And all this was to bring hell to pay within a very short time in 1979, when large street protests broke out against the Shah's regime. And to the great surprise of the CIA and the United States, the Shah's regime collapsed like a house of cards in 1979. His secret police was unable to stop the thousands, tens of thousands, even larger. Ruhollah Khomeini took advantage of this by having his sermons taped and spread surreptitiously throughout the regime. And the secret police couldn't stop it. And so the opposition grew to the extent where the Shah had to flee for his life, and the regime collapsed.